And of course, this session is an introductory discussion about the UK-EU referendum, also known as Brexit, and getting your perspectives on the implications on US and global business. So before we move forward, just want to make sure everybody can hear okay. If you can just give an affirmative, that would be great.
Yep, clear.
Yes.
Clear here.
Okay, fantastic. So I will go ahead and introduce our presenters, and then I'll hand it over to Laura to introduce herself and moderate the event. So joining us today is Ms. Bernadette Greene, who is Deputy Consul-General at the British Consulate in Los Angeles. Also joining us is Mr. Paul Wright, who is the head of Paul Wright and Associates, specializing in international and domestic transactional matters and litigation matters in Malibu, California, based out of Malibu, California. He is also the chair of the British American Business Council in Los Angeles. Mr. Claudio Toyoma is also joining us, I believe, from the Baltimore area. He's Chief Change Facilitator at Toyoma and Company, a transformational leadership company with a substantial presence and business operations in the UK. And I believe he's also a member of Global Chamber Baltimore. And so Laura, I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll get on with the program.
Wonderful. My name is Laura Zarnicki. I'm the Executive Director here in Los Angeles. I have a little bit of an interesting background. I come from the automotive space primarily in investment banking. But I'm very excited. We're just now getting ready to launch in Los Angeles. So we have a series of events we're working on over the next few months to really kick off Los Angeles, the Global Chamber being in Los Angeles, and I'm excited. This is really one of our very first events that we're participating in. So I'm excited to be doing this with Consul and San Diego. And what a great first topic. You know, not only on Brexit and how it affects the United States, but even I'd like to touch a little bit on Southern California in particular. So excited to have a few people there. I'm going to have a couple of my board members on the call as well, who are they overlap with San Diego a little bit. Stephen Bay will be on, or he's on already. He's the Chief Security Officer for a company called Nuvasiv. And then Newt Burks, who comes to us from Alcoa, which is an aluminum company, and they do lots of buying overseas aluminum. So there are just a couple of additional people who will be involved in the call. So anyways, excited to get this started and to see what kinds of questions we have from our audience. I don't know who wants to get started, but if there's anybody there, maybe there with Consul who has a question for our panelists, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So I think one of the first things that we'd like to ask is to Ms. Greene. Can you share with us some of the basic details of the referendum, what it does, what it doesn't do, and what the next steps would be, and anything that you can tell us of the landscape and the environment in the UK at the moment, with the understanding that a lot of things are going to be, developing over the next year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for inviting the British Consulate to participate in this event. As you say, it's very opportune, it's very current, and it's important that we are able to portray the messages that we would like to give there to the business community and the other stakeholders. So just there's various points that I would like to make in particular about the EU referendum. The first thing is about the democratic process. Britain has made a decision to leave the EU. It may not be what many people want, but it's what the majority of our electorate want. And so there's no point that we say in looking back in anger. In great democracies like ours, when the people speak, we respect their verdict and we must take the decision as an instruction to deliver. So that's exactly what we're going to do. The next thing I would like to touch on is timing. When our previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, announced his resignation on June 24th, He said that he hoped that a new leader would be in place by October. As you all know, Theresa May, our previous Home Office Minister, was sworn in as the new Prime Minister yesterday, 13th of July. Theresa is just the second female Prime Minister in British history after Margaret Thatcher. It will now be Theresa May's job to trigger Article 50, which is basically the start of the UK exiting the European Union. After Article 50 has been triggered, it could take up to a further 2 years before the UK's exit is complete. So I want to make that clear. It's a long process. In the meantime, nothing changes. We are still a full and functioning part of the European Union, and we will remain so until the completion of the exit process. The next point I want to address is the UK's place in the world. There's a lot of things out there in the paper about us being a key player in the global stage. We will continue to remain a key player in the global stage. We are a member of the G7, we're a member of the G20, we still remain a member of the UN Security Council. We are the only country to keep our commitment of 0.7% GDP spend on development goals, and we're a member of NATO. We're the only country to keep our commitment of 2% GDP spend on defence, and we're the fourth largest military in the world. So with unrivaled soft power, the UK will continue to exercise significant influence. Now, I want to spend a little bit more on the other two areas I'd like to talk about, economic and the UK-US relationship. So on the UK economy, one thing I'd like to say is it's resilient and well positioned to weather this period of uncertainty. Post-referendum, it's clear that the markets are volatile and there are some companies considering their investments. We know this is going to be far from plain sailing, but as a result of our long-term economic plan, we're well placed to face the challenges ahead. The UK is one of the strongest major advanced economies in the world. We're the fifth largest. We have low stable inflation. The budget deficit is down from 11% of national income and is forecast to be below 3% this year. So the financial system is also substantially more resilient than it was in the last 6 years. The Bank of England stands ready to take all necessary steps, as mentioned by Mark Carney, to maintain a strong financial system. The Treasury, the Bank of England, the Financial Conduct Authority are monitoring the financial markets closely after the EU referendum, as we would expect. The Governor has said that the bank has taken all the necessary steps to prepare. As the markets adjust and the UK economy moves forward, the bank will not hesitate to take additional measures as required. The UK banking sector, I just want to emphasise, is strong. The capital requirements of our largest banks are 10 times higher than before the financial crisis that we had in 1984, or certainly in the 1980s. The UK is highly competitive and open for business. I want to emphasise that, open for business. The Chancellor has said that HMG is committed to delivering a low tax regime, and that will attract multinational businesses, and we want to see in Britain. HMG's lowered the tax on company profits to 20%, the lowest rate in the G7 and the joint lowest rate in the G20. Corporate tax will be reduced to 17% by 2020, and to encourage innovation, HMG tax profits from new patents are at a special rate of 10%. So the UK remains the highest ranking major economy in terms of ease of doing business. Going on to the UK-US relationship. Friends and supporters on both sides of the Atlantic have been very clear. The special relationship will continue to be vital to the global prosperity and to security in the world. It's in both of our interests to ensure this. We are each other's largest investors, with almost $1 trillion invested in each other's economies. The US investment in the UK is around 10 times the US investment in China. British investment in the US is around 50 times Chinese investment in the US. We're each other's largest foreign job creators. Over 1 million people in the US work for British companies, and vice versa. The UK is a leading financial centre, serving not just the continent of Europe, but the entire world. So the way ahead will require patience, pragmatism, negotiating skills, and a clear vision for our national interests. There will be no immediate change to our relationship with the EU, and I want to emphasise that. We are still part of the European Union. There will be no immediate change, and that will take time. The way that our goods move and the way that our services are sold remain the same. We will take our time to determine the trading arrangements with the European allies outside of the political union. Having been the voice for free trade inside the European Union, we now look to be the voice across the world. For the first time in 40 years, the UK will be setting its own trade terms. The last and final point is that we may be leaving the European Union, but we are not leaving Europe. And I need to emphasise that. We will have a relationship with both. What kind of relationship that will be is yet to be determined. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Great insight and a nice overview. Great way to start off this this roundtable discussion. Anybody have any questions for or anything specific to address with what was just stated?
Yeah, Laura, we do have a question here. Philip, who is with the U.S. Commercial Service, would like to ask a question.
Hi, this is Philip Piniello. I'll mention I'm with the U.S. Commercial Service. I'm also a former LES with UK-EU Chicago and with the Global Issues Group in the British Embassy in D.C. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can just about hear you, Philip. I don't know if you're close to a mic or not, but I can just about hear you. If you say your question, if I don't understand it, maybe someone can repeat it.
Can you understand me better now?
Yeah, much better.
Much better. Okay. So as a former LES with UK-TI in Chicago and with the Global Issues Group in UK Embassy in DC, I recognize a lot of the statistics that you mentioned, and I understand the relationship is still strong, both in goods and services and in investment. What else would you add, however, to reassure U.S. investors in the UK on the UK as a launchpad for wider market access to the EU, both in trade and investment? How do you feel? I know you can't answer everything right now, but how do you feel that that may be impacted? What would you say to reassure U.S. investors in the UK right now that a lot of homes, specific reason that they would have access to the market?
Philip, I mean, I think a lot of what I've said, I hope a lot of what I said goes to show that the UK is and always will be a trading nation, and a strong trading nation at that. And we expect this to continue and accelerate in the years ahead. Maintaining a strong economy is one thing in terms of business. The business-friendly environment is frozen in the UK. That remains the same. That's not going to change. And foreign investment is crucial for our economy. So we will do everything that we can to ensure that that business-friendly environment remains the same and that our economy remains strong, so that people have that trust in maintaining trade and investment in the UK. The future relationship in terms of securing what benefits we can on trade and investment for the EU is for the Prime Minister to decide. That's up to negotiation over the next 2 years. So, you know, there's a lot that's uncertain, there's a lot that's unsure, but everything remains the same at the moment. We've not changed overnight. We are still part of the European Union. We are still a strong country to invest in and to do trade from. We still have those strong links with the European Union. We still have a good broadband service. We still have good transport links. We still have good air links, and we still have a good economy. We still have skilled staff. So all of the reasons why people invest in the UK are still there. That's not going to change.
Could I just add something to that?
Please go ahead.
When Bernadette said that things aren't likely to change, I think that's true over an extended period. Because what people don't realize is that the EU countries run a very substantial surplus, a trade surplus with the UK. I believe that's around £80 billion. So, for example, the UK is Germany's largest export market, and the huge amount of Mercedes and BMW sold in the UK. France has about a 12 billion euro trade surplus with the UK. So I believe in the end there has to be some free trade agreement with the UK, and very much along the lines of the single market, because it's in the European Union's interest as well as the British interest. With that said, Britain, with all its other advantages, as set out by Bernadette, I think with all its other advantages, will remain and maybe even increase as a destination for investment. And I say that because now there was a Minister for International Trade, Liam Fox, appointed yesterday, and he will be looking to sign free trade agreements with China, with India, with the United States, and many other countries. So just as Britain will continue in its trading relationship with the EU countries, it will expand its vision and its trading vision with other countries. So I think overall, I think the prospects are good.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And Paul, I don't know, sorry Laura, I know that you're moderating this panel, but given that a lot of the questions may be around trade and investment and things are uncertain from a government point of view, obviously it's for the new Prime Minister to dictate where we go going forward. I don't know if it's worthwhile, I don't know if you were going to say something, Paul, from the BABC's perspective, given the knowledge on the business community that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to, I mean, I'm a globalist by nature, and I think, you know, I mean, you've mentioned that Britain is the largest single investor country by country in the US, and that's not going to change, and vice versa. 1 million people in the respective countries go to work by virtue of that. So we have a very solid transatlantic relationship, and I do agree that a lot of the US investment is foreign direct investment, in part because of the EU, but not totally because of the EU. So I think that relationship is very strong on a transatlantic basis, and that will only increase, particularly if Britain manages to secure a free trade agreement with the US. But I think we're going to expand outside that, and when you look at you know, emerging countries like India, where Britain does relatively low, relatively small amount of trade at the moment, I think there's huge possibilities in countries like India and China and the countries of South America and other countries. So I'm excited by nature. I do have some of the fears that you do, Bernadette. We're an offshore island off Europe, but we've had a pretty good history in the past in trading globally. And I think there will be a renewed emphasis on that. And I think there's a lot of exciting prospects ahead.
That's great. I don't know, Claudia, do you have anything to add to what has been said so far, or?
Actually, well, my point of view is, of course, you know, I'm a practitioner that has, you know, operations, a large operation in London and also in São Paulo, Brazil, you know, apart from here in, you know, close to Washington, D.C. But also I'm not as much of a huge player as, you know, I'm not an Audi or I'm not a, you know, BMW. So what I'm seeing right now is, you know, a lot of uncertainty. And of course, you know, the pound has dropped to a 30, I think it's a 30-year low. So all the business that I have been doing in the UK, you know, recently just dropped by 20%, you know, the revenues from there. So there is for me, there is a lot of uncertainty. I really loved what Ms. Greene, you know, talked about and what Paul is talking about, because I'm also, you know, I see the future as bright. But right now, you know, it is a little bit painful to be doing business in the UK. So that's what I wanted to add.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions on your
Claudia, Sorry, if you don't mind, Laura, just to respond to Claudia's response there about uncertainties in the market, I would just like to add further to me saying that the Bank of England and everybody else is putting in contingency measures, and that our banking system is flexible enough to sustain these shocks over a period of time. The Bank of England also stands ready to provide up to $250 billion to support smooth banking and market function, and has arranged swap lines in advance to enable lending in foreign currencies. So there's lots of things that the Bank of England has considered in terms of contingencies for anything that might happen with shocks to the market.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, what I was talking about is because I am an European citizen, so there is uncertainty also in regards to, what's going to happen to the European citizens in, working in the UK. Because right now I can just fly over there and, go through the EU channels and everything, and can work there freely, with my colleagues. But if that changes, of course it will depend, what comes next, from the Prime Minister and all the everything that is going to be done. But right now we don't know if we should continue investing or not because of that situation. If we're going to be allowed in a couple of years' time or not, and what are the hoops that we're going to have to jump. But all I want to say is that I'm still feeling very positive about it. I don't want to sound negative. It is just some preoccupations that we have.
Claudio, if I can...
Please.
Paul, have some responses to what you've just shared, but ask you to tell us a little bit more about your company and what you do, and what the nature of your operations are in the UK. I think that would help us tremendously to understand, just the context of your comments.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what we do is we do cultural change, and so a lot of change management and cultural change and executive coaching and leadership development. And I spent 12 years in London before moving here to the US, and I still have, as I said, I still have a large operation there in London. So yes, that's that, and we focus primarily on the Fortune 500 companies and global Fortune 500 companies. So that's the nature of my business. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I don't know, Kuntal, did you want to move down to Paul and giving his overview of trade and investment interests, or are there more questions on your end?
Yeah, I'd just like to address...
I think, why don't we...
Sorry.
Yeah. No, Paul, please go ahead. We'll take some more questions towards the end, but I'd like Paul to just share with us a little bit of, what he's seeing from his clients as well.
Hello?
And yes, from a business and trade perspective, if you can just share with us your side.
Yeah, just let me make one point. I mean, when people, and I understand, because fear is a predominant factor is probably the strongest factor in a person's psychological makeup. The vote happened just a few weeks ago. So I think the I think the uncertainties in that sense in the newspapers and the media, including the social media, has been overhyped to an extent. It's more fear of what could possibly happen in the future. What I believe is that this fear will dissipate pretty rapidly. The pound is actually increased after in value after the new Prime Minister was announced, and I think a lot of the confidence is going to come back very quickly into the UK economy, particularly if we start negotiating free trade agreements, etc. So, and I know a lot of that is psychological, but the nature of Britain is not going to change. We're a liberal democracy. We're a global trading center, and that's who we are as a people. So I have very little fears ultimately on the immigration side, and I have very little fear about the way we do business in the world. I think it's not going to change. In fact, there may be a greater emphasis on the liberal nature of that. So I think things are positive. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and I think people who have some fear at the moment just need to just stay calm. Everything's going to work out, and it's going to work out in a lot quicker time than most people think. And as for the pound, it's not a bad thing, maybe, that the pound dropped a bit. It helps our exporters. I notice, just reviewing, there's been quite a substantial investment into the London property market from a major US company, precisely because the pound had fallen. So the pound being devalued, unfortunately for Claudio, may be a bit painful for him at the moment, but it does have some other benefits to the economy. But I'm on Claudio's side, and I want him to be getting good profits from the UK back here.
Thank you. And can I just add one thing to Paul's comments and Ms. Greene's comments as well? Out of all the European Union countries, I agree with you both that the UK is very business friendly, very, very, very business friendly. I came from Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil, and I have lived in 5 different countries, and the UK is the most business-friendly country that I have ever lived in or done business with. So I agree with you on that.
And I think actually we're going to get even more business-friendly. I mean, Bernadette dealt with the lowering of the corporate tax rate, but if you look at particularly the senior members of the new cabinet announced by Theresa May, this is a very, very business-friendly cabinet who will do what it needs to do.
How refreshing. That's wonderful. That's great news.
Lauria and Claudia, can I flip the question back to you, your audience and your members, in terms of what are their fears, what are their concerns, and what do they want to see as the UK emerging in the next 2 years?
I have that, which I think is a great question too.
So we do have a question here in San Diego. If you can just introduce yourself.
My name is Luis Mirabal, and I work in the economic modeling for Qualcomm, right around the corner from here. My question is that I share and I understand your optimism in the economic front, but if nothing is going to change, I want to know your opinion of what are the things that are going to change. Because there are certainly changes that the result shows that the UK citizens want some change. So what do you think it is going to change?
So if you heard the question, the statement was made that, of course, the referendum and the vote for the referendum indicates that the public, UK public and citizens want change. And so, what is, if nothing is changing right now, what is likely to change? If you can anticipate that and share with us.
From a government perspective, it's too early to say. As Paul mentioned, the new cabinet have just been voted in yesterday. The Prime Minister's just been voted in yesterday. Everything will be at the decision of the Prime Minister. It's for her to take forward the negotiations with the EU and to decide how she's going to run her cabinet going forward. So at the moment, for me, as I say, everything remains the same, and I can't speculate how things are going to move forward.
I'll take a speculative stab at that.
Please do, Paul.
Okay. Obviously, things are going to change, and it was really, in the end, it was an issue of sovereignty. Now, there's no such thing as a completely sovereign country in a global economy. But I think certain things are going to change. There's going to be with trade relations and trade agreements, there's going to be more, obviously, we're going to look to reclaim those powers and to look out into the world and to forge new trade agreements, etc. With regards to the Supreme Court in London, that's always been an issue of, has it ceded power to the European Court? Those powers will almost certainly be brought back. So it's really an issue of sovereignty. Now, with sovereignty, and I think one of your questions may be hinting on this, it will be interesting to see what happens on the immigration side, because, I mean, Norway really, Norway isn't part of the EU, but in order to trade with the EU, it has a particular relationship with them, and basically there's free movement of labour connected with that. There will be some sort of compromise worked out with the UK, and it may not be much different than it is now. If it is any different, it would obviously be more focused on the skill sets that a person who comes to a country with. That is all highly speculative. The European economy is very important to the UK, and I doubt that David Davis or any other cabinet minister is going to jeopardise the British economy with a bad deal with Europe.
Thank you. And I think Barbara Bernie had asked earlier if there were any specific concerns, and so I'll just ask our group here, are there specific concerns that any of you have or interests that you have that you'd like to find out more about? Yes, Eric.
So looking forward many years, is this an example that other countries may follow, or are you in an individual position where this was, I guess, easier to do than anybody else would be able to do?
I will leave that to either Bernie or Paul.
Again, I can't speculate what other countries will decide or not decide to do. I know, as I've mentioned before, this is what the UK people have decided, and we as government officials will implement that decision. How that will pan out and what other countries decide is for other countries, people and sovereign nations to take forward and decide for themselves. But I certainly can't speculate on what that would be. Paul?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fascinating question because mainland Europe is in a state of flux at the moment. You know, the Italian banks are in trouble. There's going to be another major Greek bailout. So it's difficult to determine where is that going to lead to. The interesting thing with all the meltdown of the Greek economy, in the end, there was no Brexit, which is interesting. If there ever was going to be a Brexit, it would have been, you know, when they had to take the medicine with the money from particularly Germany. You know, there are countries that talk about referendums. Holland is one of them. Denmark, on occasion, do. My sense is that there probably won't be a movement towards that. But there's a lot of dynamics in Europe, and anything's possible. A lot will depend, I suspect, on what happens with the UK when it goes off in its own negotiated way. It will be fascinating to see.
And if I may also add, one other thing about the UK economy is what Bernadette was talking about. You know, it is a really large economy in the global scheme of things, and the other two only, you know, global economies in Europe are Germany and France. the size, the biggest sizes of economies. So I really don't think that the other countries would think about leaving, an economic European, party just for the sake of it.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So just as I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just going to say those are all great points. Yeah, go ahead, Kutal.
I do have a quick question, and I open the floor up for others who are here to ask. But if a company has been considering planning to set up shop, at this stage, would be your to those business owners, and what are some of the immediate issues or items that you would ask them to in light of Brexit, if it would be any different at all now than before?
Kuntal, I didn't get quite a bit of that question. You were coming in and out.
I can try to rephrase.
So the question is, if there's a... Yeah, please go ahead, Laura.
No, I was going to just rephrase. Can you hear me okay?
Clear, Laura.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Kuntal was just asking now if a company were to go over right before the or now currently, would there be changes in the culture and from an HR standpoint and from all of those aspects, a business setting up new now versus in 2 years from now?
As I think I mentioned at the beginning, everything remains as it was and is now in the UK. We have been a strong trade nation. We continue to be a strong trade nation. People come to the UK to invest. They come to trade because of the culture, because of the skills, because of the transport, because of the strong economy. That's not changed, and it's not changing at the moment. And in terms of 2 years from now, I don't know. 2 years from now, who knows what will happen? I would expect the economy to remain the same, to be strong, as Paul mentioned before. That's certainly our vision, is to remain a strong economy, to remain a strong, robust business environment, and to continue to encourage companies to invest and do trade in the UK. That is our long-term goal. That is what we are working towards, and it will be up to the Prime Minister to take that forward once she triggers Article 50.
Is there or has there been, even regardless of Brexit, a shifting of industries in recent years that you've seen companies coming into the UK and do business in, or has that remained pretty consistent?
As far as I'm aware, it's pretty consistent. I don't have the fine details on that. I don't know if Paul would be better placed as part of the American Business Council to answer that. Paul, do you have any statistics?
Yeah, I think London is seen as a global financial centre, but what is a little known is that, sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback, is that the tech centre is booming, and that's become a sort of a European tech centre. It's sort of the Silicon Valley of Europe, and that sort of happening in the East End of London, next to the financial district. I think that has a great future. I'm not so sure it's going to be harmed ultimately by Brexit. A lot of young kids doing smart things like they do in California. That I think that's one of the most exciting aspects of the UK economy, and that's not limited to London.
And also, I would add, Paul, I would add the creative industries as well.
Absolutely.
Which is very linked, and the film industry, for instance, and all the other creative industries like design and branding and all of that.
Yeah, a lot of iconic brands in the UK, and British luxury brands are probably at the highest point in their history. So there's a lot of positive signs, and those aren't going to change. And in fact, if we're reducing corporate tax, they may get even better.
Now, Claudio, did you want to go touch on managing and leading during broad transformational changes, and what your experience, what you foresee your experience being over the next couple of years?
Yes, I have a lot of questions in my mind right now, actually. Because I see both points in terms of what Bernadette is saying and what Paul is saying. And I see huge potential, for this, for the UK economy right now, and especially because when I lived in London, as I mentioned, I lived for 12 years in London. I always felt that even though the UK is very close to Europe, UK was very close commercially to the United States. Very much so. So I really don't know if maybe the Brexit will also be something really good for the UK-US relationship, that will bring the two countries even closer now, and then still being a portal to Europe, as it has been over the past decades. So that's what I'm not sure about, but that's what I'm kind of envisaging happening currently.
Do any of our other panelists have anything to add to that? No?
I think that's an astute comment. I think within Europe that's caused quite a bit of frustration over the years, that when major issues have come up in the world, the British have often taken the US position rather than a more European position on those issues. And that may be a natural instinct, but I think you're going to see a closer relationship, definitely going to see a closer relationship between the US and the UK, and that may well extend out to a lot of other countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and I'm fascinated with India. I think India has a great future, and I think Britain should be, I think there's huge opportunities for Britain in India. But there's a lot of emerging countries in South America and all around the world. It's actually an exciting time.
That's very interesting how you bring up the other English-speaking nations and from previous historic alliances with the UK to what's going to happen over the next couple of years. Yeah, just something else to think about, and not just a whole other angle.
And Laura, as I mentioned earlier in my kind of opening gambit, friends and supporters on both sides of the Atlantic have made clear that that special relationship will continue to be vital to global prosperity and security. And Secretary of State Kerry obviously had a message to Boris Johnson, our new Foreign Secretary, this morning to that effect, that the relationship should remain stable and strong.
Oh, wonderful.
So I would just ask if any of the panelists have questions for some of the folks who are gathering. Bernadette, you had asked a few questions, but if others would like to ask folks who are here something specific, this is an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a very direct question. I'd like to. Claudia has obviously answered this question, but the other panel members, what do they see? How do they see Brexit, and how do they see the future after Brexit from their perspective?
So I think what we'll do is, unfortunately, again, for you to see these folks, but we'll go around the room and just have a couple of words by each person if they have something to share about that. So Eric, we'll start with you.
From my professional perspective, it doesn't affect us very much. We still see the market as the same, and minus a little fluctuation in the currency. As an exporter, I don't think it's going to make a big difference to us. I guess my concern is more, who are the opponents, not the proponents, but the opponents in the UK? Who is fighting this the hardest? And I'm coming from purely business perspective, not a social perspective.
Yeah, that's a difficult question because the country is literally divided down the middle on this issue. But I think it's a sort of, as Bernadette said at the beginning, that, you know, the decision has been made. A lot of people don't like it in the country, but they will go with it. And there is actually something quite British about that. They will. I don't think it's in the long term going to cause a lot of dissent. There is some powerful opposition at the moment, but businesses adjust to their circumstances, and that's the nature of business, and they will this time.
You know, UK, London's been known for being the financial center of the world. Doesn't this hurt the financial sector, not having access to Europe as easy?
Well, I mean, I'm going to defer to Bernadette on this, but, you know, I think it's a stretch to say we don't have access to Europe. You know, I said at the beginning, you know, there's very, very good reasons from both sides, particularly the European side, given the trade surplus that I think it's a 80 billion trade surplus they run with the UK. An agreement will be worked out that it is advantageous to the Europeans and to the British and for outside investment. So I don't look at that in a gloomy manner. We're major trading partners, and there really should be free trade between the respective countries in a way that wouldn't affect inward US investment into the UK.
And I think, from my perspective, again, as I mentioned earlier, the UK banking sector is strong. Banking requirements are 10 times stronger than they were before in the last financial crisis. So we can withstand shocks quite substantially. We will continue to strive to be the capital financial centre of the world. We currently are, that remains the same. And everything that we do going forward will encourage investment into the UK. As Paul had mentioned and I've mentioned before, the profit on corporations is 20%. We're looking to lower that, so we're doing everything to encourage continued investment and continued financial stability in the UK.
Thank you. So we'll continue to go around, and if there are any other concerns or, yes. So we have someone here. If you could please introduce yourself.
I'm Martina Montalva, and I'm a consulting firm here in San Diego. Professionally, I'm probably on the same page with Eric. It doesn't affect the business much. Most of my clients are in the US currently. But I guess the concern is more on the implications and the uncertainties. I mean, we don't know where it is. I mean, some of the concern is about where is all this coming from. Same question that Eric was asking from, and I guess I always saw the European Union as an example of collaboration, and then it's like separation, right? Separation. So is this a trend that we're seeing globally in the world? I mean, we have elections coming up in the US, and one of our candidates have a very clear tendency towards separation, to building walls and all that fun. And it's just like I guess it's a general concern of, is this something that is happening globally? It's coming from the public, so is that reflecting something that the public is feeling, and how that impacts the world now that we're so connected and so global, like with internet and social media, and it's a different world today. So how this all is impacting us as a global community? Yes, it's more a concern, an overall concern overall on what's coming up in the next years.
So I think if I can maybe just interject in that, maybe that this is seen as an example, that Brexit is seen as an example of perhaps a trend going in an anti-globalization route when there has been so much over the last 20 years, whether it's in terms of technology and business, to political institutions and nation states moving in one direction, and now perhaps this might be the advent or the beginning of maybe moving in another direction. I think just the fact that we're all here sitting talking about this is probably one example that it's not, but you know, I think it's a fair assessment and maybe one that if you care to respond to.
If I could, before Paul or Claudia interjects there, from the UK perspective, all I would say is that our relationship with the EU, we're not part of the European monetary system, we're not part of Schengen, so we haven't had that full relationship with the European Union that other European countries have. And as I mentioned, we still want a relationship, it will just be a different type of relationship. So we're not we are exiting the European Union, but the relationship with the Union and the relationship with European countries will be different, and we will want a different kind of relationship.
Can I just add something as well? What I see is not actually a movement anti-globalization, but I see a movement anti-centralized control. That's what I see. You know, and I think that that's one of the things that we heard a lot of from Brexit, is that, yeah, European Union, you know, they are controlling too much our, not really the economy, but what is done, you know, with the money that goes to the European Union and all of that. So that's what I see, and not actually anti-globalization, because I think that the measures will be put in place so that the UK is still trading with the European Union and across the globe, but it has been, you know, over centuries right now.
I think that's a very, very good point by Claudio, and I think that's backed up. I mean, I think London is actually the most international city in the world. Nobody wants to change that, but people were worried about faceless bureaucrats, rightly or wrongly, in Brussels, commissioners that they didn't know, who were basically controlling, you know, the distributions of the substantial amount of money that flowed into Brussels, and you know, a feeling of loss of control of their national parliaments within the context of collaborative countries throughout Europe. That was the sense that loss of power and to people that they didn't know was a factor in the referendum. But that's a factor around the world, as Claudio has pointed out. But it doesn't mean, as Claudio said, that countries don't want to cooperate. We live in a global economy. I don't think, other than North Korea, I don't think anybody's really fighting that. I think that trend will continue, but I think there's a sort of an anti-establishment, anti-politician mood that maybe transcends some of these arguments, and certainly in the Western world we appear to be against all politicians at the moment. I'm just looking for somebody who may be more straightforward about what's going on, and what's going on in the respective countries, including the US. So I think there is a factor there, but I think it's just a certain point in history where people are feeling a bit cynical and a little let down by their so-called leaders.
Thank you, and we have a few more folks here. Any other concerns or questions? Sure. Michael Curl is here, and Mike, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I should have played. Mike Curl. I actually work for HSBC Bank, so I follow Brexit pretty closely, being part of a British bank. I guess my question is on a couple of comments that have been said. One about kind of nothing's changed, nothing will change for 2 years, which I understand that as they get out. And then also about the foreign exchange, where you talk about, you know, it'll help the UK exports. I guess it's kind of a two-part question, where one is, though nothing's changed, how do you prevent kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas businesses feel that it's going to get harder, and you already, the news already talks about businesses reducing their spending in the UK. How do you then prevent, a recession from happening because they think that a recession is going to happen, so they cause a recession to happen by stopping the capital spending. And then and then you talk about the export side. The currency does go down, it does help exports, but the UK having such a large trade deficit, just turning on the tap of exports isn't necessarily that easy. And so how do you then develop those, those export markets and develop those export products to be able to then capitalize from a currency devaluation? Sorry, two questions there.
That's a good question for you, Bernadette. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. I realise that. I think I said my opening gambit that the Treasury and the Bank of England and various other financial institutes have been monitoring the financial markets, monitoring everything that's happening in the UK, and they're well prepared to put other steps in place to put a stop on any recession happening, any crisis in the banking system. What those steps are will be up to the Bank of England, and I don't know the full details, but certainly they've put lots of steps in place to ensure that the UK economy remains strong. And on the other part, sorry, I missed the second question. What was the second question?
Sorry, we've got microphone issues here. So
I think the second question was more on the foreign exchange and the export markets, right? I understand that the reduced, the lower, the devalued currencies for exports, but predominantly in import markets, I see probably more strain on imports and benefits exports.
Sorry, I missed. It's not coming through.
Maybe you can mute.
Yeah, I think maybe Bernie, you might need to mute your microphone and.
Yeah, sorry, I have.
Okay, then Paul, maybe your microphone needs to. Mute. Okay, there we go.
Okay, I think of it. Yeah, just let me jump in. Sorry, Bernie.
Go on, Paul. Feel free to jump in.
I think you raised a couple of interesting points there. Number one, you referred to the psychology of a recession, and I think that's very true. I think you can talk a country or an economy into a recession, and I think that would be unwarranted in the UK. That actually may, incidentally, why Theresa May not have may have gotten rid of George Osborne as the Chancellor. That he was very pessimistic about Britain post-Brexit. He tried to be a lot more optimistic, probably for self-interest after the vote. But I think she's released him from the cabinet. But I think that is a factor. With positive thinking and making things work is an economic factor. I think the second part is when you say, well, why? How can Britain as an economy start sort of making up its trade deficit by exporting more? David Cameron made a very interesting remark during the election, which I think was electioneering because I don't think it was true. He was saying we export more to Luxembourg than we do to India. Well, I looked up the figures and that's literally not true. But even if it was half said in jest, and maybe has an element of truth that we're so tied in to Europe. I mean, why aren't we expanding our trade with India and looking for these emerging markets that have huge opportunity? From financial services to luxury goods to engineering. I mean, the British economy is a very big, strong economy with some iconic brands. And I think there are tremendous opportunities worldwide. I always remember one day, on one vacation, working vacation, I was in Argentina, and I was struck by you know, how the US companies really dominated the market there, and how actually few British products there were in Argentina, and I could see sort of the potential there, and I think that's sort of true globally, and I think if Britain has the right focus and businesses focus on the right markets, I think there's some interesting opportunities that would help us deal with the trade deficit.
Paul, thanks for that. I mean, the only thing I would add to that in terms of the government perspective is that, I mean, we can't force companies to export overseas. We encourage them, and we give them lots of incentives and support to do that as part of our UK trade and investment services. So we are very supportive of our companies who try to export and do exports overseas. And we're a strong trading nation. So, you know, the fact that we're a strong trading nation shows that we do export quite substantially and globally. I don't have the details, I don't have the statistics, but we're definitely a strong trading nation across the globe. And we do give support as a government agency to companies who are looking to export to different markets, certainly from our perspective, 220 globally here.
Well, Paul, I think you're in luck because we have Naresh here, who is president of the South Coast chapter of the Indus Entrepreneurs, and so I think he can at least give some of his perspective in dealing with Indian entrepreneurs and the relationship moving forward potentially with the UK.
Right.
The first thing is on the Brexit itself. My thesis is that you know, I think if you look at what happened in the last 2 decades is globalization, and with globalization, all the economies are tied together. And now, last few years, what has been happening is economic stagnation. Think about it this way. I mean, all across the globe, you know, if you look at Europe, US, I mean, the growth rates are in, you know, 0.7%, 1%, whatever. So my thesis is that, okay, you know, why should I tie to the global economy? I'll go independent and I'll grow my economy. So that's something that I think is happening as a trend, rather than, you know, okay, I'm tied to everybody. If financial crisis happens, everybody gets crushed. I mean, look at what happened in 2007, right? So I mean, I think people are kind of getting burned out with that. The other thing that I saw was that, you know, with economic stagnation, some of the middle class or lower middle class people, they have suffered. Think about it. And UK, I think you heard the voice of these people. They wanted to Brexit because of this. You know, they did not go anywhere. They are jobless, and I mean, there is a lot of suffering. So I think that's another thing. But from an entrepreneurial perspective, what my thought process is that you know, most of the entrepreneurs that I talk to, if they want access to U.S. market, I mean, like European market, what they do is they want to set up a center in UK because number one, English-speaking country, they can communicate well with the UK, you know, and also UK has access to big, large global European market. So I think, I hope that equation does not change. That's my question: is will it change? You know, with that, because most of the entrepreneurs that I know, they want to expand globally. They start with Europe, and if UK is not the center bed of that, then where do they go?
And is that true? Is your question also coming from the perspective of business people from India as well, thinking in similar terms?
Yeah,
okay.
Similar terms. Right.
I will open that up to either Paul or to Bernie to respond, and of course, Claudio, feel free to jump in if you'd like as well.
Can I just yeah. So it's Claudio here. I went to India in March, so it was a little bit before Brexit. But what I noticed was, yes, there is a huge, opportunity in the UK and huge opportunity here in the US. But also, what I see is that what's going to depend on is what are the policies that the UK will be implementing now that Brexit is in place. or that they're going through this 2-year period of leaving the EU, what are going to be the policies in place for trading with Europe and with the rest of the world? So I think that's gonna make the case for what's going to happen next. Thank you.
And from our standpoint, I think I made the case under the point about the UK economy that the UK have a low and stable inflation, and we would obviously continue to ensure that that was the case. Claudia, just to say, with apologies, I do need to leave in the next few minutes. I've got another event at 6 o'clock. So if I have to opt out, my apologies.
Thank you very much. Yes, Bernie, we appreciate your participation, and we're going to be wrapping up in just a few minutes, but I'll let Paul also respond quickly, and we should be finished fairly soon.
If you look at the cabinet and the senior government ministers who were involved with trade, they're all free traders, and it's not as though Britain is going to go into a protectionist phase in its history. Far from it. Britain, more than any other country, knows it has to be a trading nation, it has to be an open nation, and that includes with Europe. And I don't think you're going to get any policies pushed through that contradict that. So ultimately, Theresa May and her cabinet have to deliver a successful Brexit, not a Brexit that leads to a recession in the UK and diminished trade. They would be voted out of office. It's not what they want, and I don't think it will happen.
Well, thank you so much. Laura, did you have any last thoughts that you'd like to add? I think we can all very much say, just from the conversation today, as well as all of the reactions that we're seeing, and we certainly, much of what we see is through the media, but I think we understand that this is going to take time, and clearly there's enough sentiment to not let this be overly a negative impact, because there are a lot of people in the UK that are also looking very closely at these activities, and so I imagine that we can all get from your thoughts and from your perspective that a seamless business operation for both within the UK as well as to the broader EU is very much in the interest of the UK as well as for the rest of the world. So that, I think, is well understood. And Laura, I'd like to just turn it to you and any last thoughts that you might have.
Yeah, I just, my one thought is just the opportunities and how regardless of even Brexit, it sounds like the investment climate in the UK is unchanged. But if anything, in recent years, it's changed for the positive, and the potential is wonderful, especially in comparison to the rest of Europe right now. And it's fascinating. The UK's ties and how America has influenced a lot. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years to see a lot of what rolls out. But again, it sounds like for our for investors that the sky is the limit right now with the UK, and it's no negatives, which is nice. Yeah, so that's really all I have to add. Really just learned a lot today, and thank you so much, everybody, for participating. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again. It's been very insightful. Thank you for taking the time, and we will certainly have you on board again if we would like to do a follow-up in the next couple of months, or perhaps 6 months down the line, and see where we are. So thank you very much, and we will sign off. And thanks for everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.